that. In one of your outings, you said the U.S. government has started adopting your own language as regards this Ambazonian Southern Cameroon's liberation cause. What is your own language?
From the get-go, let's say a couple of things. The first is I'm not satisfied when I've never been satisfied when one establishes an equivalence between both sides, as is the general language now, because there is never an equivalence between the side that has declared war and the side that's doing self-defense. It is simply not possible. One cannot say that on the one hand, the Nazis, on the other hand, the Jews are doing this. There always should be a distinction between who is committing an act of aggression and who is doing self-defense. There should always be a distinction between who is marginalizing and who is actually being marginalized, who is the criminal and who is the victim. Without such a distinction, we are actually falling into a moral chaos where one can simply say, people are killing each other, Africans are killing, there's war, etc., etc. I think it is important to, any sensible person will have to look into a war and understand that all situations are complex. And the complexity of a situation cannot actually say, let's blame everybody and simply say everybody is guilty. So that is the basic proposition I always had. And the second is that amongst Francophones, one cannot simply say, of course, that the government is doing this and that Francophones are doing that. Even if one says the Francophone, government, that is the government, it involves many groups that actually are not committing anything bad. Many groups that are Francophone and yet bothered me from the very beginning because and nobody actually in the international community, the UN, etc., and certainly not, in France, bothered to understand that there is a particular group of people who are killing, and that particular group is ethnically defined. So, because there is no civil war in Africa in general, that will not fall along ethnic lines. It is written in African history, and it is written in Cameroonian, in the sociology of power in Cameroon as well. So the ethnic group that has an hegemony in power now is essentially the one committing, acts of genocide in southern Cameroon. And as long as one doesn't see that, one cannot actually prosecute those who are committing crime. So let's say to see that, the resolution acknowledge that there is a French majority, a Francophone majority in government, and that it is that Francophone majority that is committing power. But a further analysis will be needed here to define exactly, the fact that Francophone, majority is also ethnically grounded. There are other things that I think are, equally important, but I've mentioned them. The fact that there must be a distinction between victims and perpetrators. Without such a distinction, there is no way one can actually have a question of accountability on the table. Maybe we are now at the level of, introduction, where finally the U.S. government is seeing into a crisis that has, been going on for so long. There is maybe one other thing that I find equally valuable. It is the fact that in one description, the U.S.
Before we come to that, Prof, you are kind of making a case of a moral equivalence by saying that moral inequivalence by saying that both parties should not be termed as such. But the language that organizations like Human Rights Watch use is Cameroon soldiers are committing offenses and Ambazonian fighters are also committing offenses. The problem here is the issues. It is not the people. Why do you want the narrative to move away from the people to move away from the issues and concentrate on the actors instead of the issues. Because if a civilian is attacked, that should be the issue.
Issues are not like mangoes that grow on trees without people's intervention. Even mangoes grow on trees with, if there's no rain, there's no mangoes. So issues are born out of a continuity. One can start from, one can even start from 1983. One can start from 1961, etc. One can start from 1916. So politics is the making of human beings. Politics is it's a perpetual fabrication. And the constitution of a group as a victim is a process. It's a process that historically there are books that are written on that. The constitution of a group as as hegemonic is also historical, and there are books that are written on that. So on the one hand, it would be possible certainly to write a history of the marginalization of English-speaking Cameroonians, and that has been done. You have now at least you have a couple of books that are readable that one can actually assign to people to read. But there also is a need to describe and to have a clear view of how the power structure works in Francophone Cameroon, and that is essential. Without a clear description of that, there is no way one can simply say, here are the facts, because facts themselves are constructed. Let us take simple examples. You have now, suddenly, you have horrendous crimes that are being committed in August, in July, etc. You have beheadings, you have bodies presented, on the street, and you have, the army marshalling itself through places, killing around. And when you look back, you realize that's exactly what happened last year during the same time, or at least during a similar time. So you can say, of course, it is a coincidence, but it's also possible that the army has a tactics, that the army has a strategy. It is possible as well that the army is constructing things to be able to have a narrative. And you can even, along those lines, you will easily see that many combatants who present themselves as Amazonians are not Amazonians. They are fake, Francophone soldiers who masquerade as Amazonians and commit crimes, horrendous crimes. And now the problem is the following, is that the Cameroonian army has always used that strategy. If you go back to the 70s, you go back to the 60s, you have groups that were called Twi during, the battle of the Maquisard, etc. You have groups that were called Twi, which means kill, kill. One can translate in Pidgin, kill and go. So Twi, chu, so kill, kill. So their only task was indeed to come and kill around and have the Maquisard be blamed for the killing. And indeed, those groups were vigilante. Those groups were formed, built by the Cameroonian army with a single purpose of committing atrocities. And when you talk with former Maquisard, they will tell you that each time they met one of those groups, they would actually fight with them. So Maquisard had to fight with two groups. On the one hand, they had to fight with the regular army, and they had to fight with those, against those Twi who were committing atrocities, and those atrocities were blamed on Maquisard. You see, an army that has such a history cannot come now in 2020 and put on, in the face of people things presented as facts, because that army has a long history. You can actually be specific, beheadings. You can even be more specific, the use of cutlasses. So you can even go further, and the random targeting of specific individuals, right? And you will see that it is a tactic, it is a strategy that has a long history in the Cameroonian army, going from 1958 or 1957 to 2020, moving from the Bassa region to the Bamileke region, and now to the Northwest and Southwest. So you see, it is not possible to simply talk about facts when you have a history that presents that in front of you presents facts as being constructions. I'll give you an example. The first, head of the Cameroonian army, General Semenge, he is taped on video saying that they were beheading people, putting their head on street corners for villagers to come and see and look and realize that Maquisards actually can be killed. So that is beheading. They were beheading with cutlasses. And now, when you look in the manual, the recruitment manual of the Cameroonian Army of 2019, I'm saying 2019, what the Cameroonian Army is doing is asking recruits to come with their own cutlass. You see, so if you look at that long history of cutlasses, you realize that the Cameroonian Army has indeed a strategy of how to use cutlasses, and now of making sure that the army itself is not blamed, because you will not have anywhere any record of the army buying cutlasses. But joining the army and using them against the population, but at the same time, you have the army with a tradition where specific groups of people are trained with the specific purpose of committing atrocities, and they are dressed like Ambazonians, like they were dressed like Maquisards, and they commit the very same atrocities that they committed during the 50s and 60s and 70s. They commit them in Bamenda. They commit them in the Northwest and Southwest. You see, facts are not that easily presented on face value. One needs to have a history of violence. One needs to have a history of victimization. One needs to have a history of the fabrication even of a soldier to be able to judge on what is a fact and what is not a fact.
Yeah,